So one of the things that I found really unique and interesting is that when we were back home, we stayed in the city, so we stayed in Lagos, and my uncle, along with my parents, had planned that they wanted to go to the village. And I was really okay with that because I wanted to be in nature and just see how beautiful it was out in the bush. And I think it took us maybe an 8 to 11 hour drive. So we made quite a few stops in between. And my uncle had arranged a kind of homecoming between myself and my parents with extended family members who were around when I was a year old. So the last time they had seen me was when I was a year old, and that's when my parents broke up. So they it was kind of like a way to for my parents to come together and bring me along so that any of the family members who saw me so young would be able to see me as an adult. That was one. Two, to kind of smooth out all the things that had happened previously. And then three, because my mother never had any other children, I think it was her way of trying to present me to her extended family because, in Nigerian society, a woman who may not have had a good marriage or who didn't have many kids or any kids, it's kind of like they're looked down upon. And so I understood that part. But then when I met her extended family, I was kind of taken aback because Nigerians are very proud people. And so I think when I met my mom, she wanted to give me all these like bold statements like, we're from this and I'm this and I'm a teacher and I'm like, all this accomplishment. And just like any job interview, you're going to give everybody the positive side of who you are, but you're never going to talk about the negative things in a way that's going to make you look bad. And so I became more analytical at this stage because I'm meeting her extended family. And it didn't hit me at first because they didn't want to talk about it. But my grandfather, so her father, who's deceased, was a polygamist. And I think that they might have used the term polygamist because they didn't want to say that he had a lot of outside children, but he wasn't married to any of these women he had children with. So my mother's side of the family is very big. Lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of kids. With her, it's her and two siblings. So she has a younger brother, my uncle, who's closer to my age, and then she has an older brother, so not older than her, but older than my other uncle. And that's the three of them from their dad. But then their dad, my grandfather, was married and had a lot of kids with that wife. But then he went on to have 20, 30, 40, 50 plus kids. Like, I don't even know. So the people that came to this event that my uncle arranged for us to meet everyone, those are the people I think wanted to pay their respects and just come to make amends and meet. But the way they behaved when I was there with my parents, I felt very self-conscious. They kind of looked at my mother with a bit of a kind of standoffish, cold sort of um, I want to, for lack of a better word, like a judgmental kind of look. And so my parents introduced me to them and they kind of looked like, okay, yeah, yeah. But then I was like, wow, this opens up a whole new treasure chest of observation, because I don't think anybody who comes from, I want to say, a polygamous slash outside children family understands the effects of having multiple children with different women outside of their marriage. I don't think anyone thinks about how that's going to affect children in the future. And one thing I realized is that I was being judgmental, but I was looking with a critical eye. So one thing I realized is that my grandmother, so my mom's mom, did not only have one child with my grandfather, and they were not married. She had three. So that means she continued to have children with someone who was already married. And because he had so many children, he answered his last name. I don't know, because he was successful or popular or sought after, people uplifted him. May he rest in peace, but people uplifted him when he's created so many rifts between the women who he's had children with, including his wife. And it started to make me think as to how come no one addresses the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is that if we want to talk about generational trauma, or if we want to go deep, look into the word epigenetics. So the kinds of things that are passed down in families that people ignore, and they want to skirt over it or gloss over it, when in fact it's caused so many problems. And I thought of, how my mom and dad had so many challenges actually establishing a relationship. And even though my parents came together and had me, her brother, so one of my uncles, didn't want my mom to be with my dad. And my dad said how difficult it was to settle their union because her brother was always blocking them from being together. And I thought, well, how is it that you come from an outside kids family, polygamous home, but none of these people are in support of a calm, peaceful union? That's one. The other part of it is my uncle didn't want my mother to have me to full term. So he kept insisting that she abort me because he didn't want my dad and her to have a kid. So I kind of looked at that too, like, how can an uncle who's one of 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 kids be the person to dictate that one of his siblings shouldn't have their child? So I thought that's, questionable. And then I looked at what my mother may have struggled with in terms of securing a relationship, because after her and my dad broke up, she never got married again. But she did have a long-term partner. So all these questions were swirling in my head, like, wow, culture, tradition is one thing, behaviors, habits, practices, and splitting up or splitting in families, that's a completely other topic. So, in that trip, I do talk about it in a little more detail, how it was, um, some things I noticed about my father. I got to see his trauma and his abuse, like when and where some of the abuse happened. One of the things I noticed is that because my dad was the second youngest of multiple children, so 8 or 9 kids, as most cultures do, especially parents who are busy and have like grown kids in various ages, you get the older kids to watch the younger kids. So one thing that I noticed is that my dad's older brother, who was supposed to become a priest, a Catholic priest, he was put in the care of that brother. And I believe that that brother abused my dad a lot because even as adults and in old age, that uncle, so that older brother, never wanted to see my dad whenever my dad came to visit back home. And I realized that oftentimes your abuser doesn't really want to face you because you survived the abuse that they put you through. So when we were on that trip, um, that uncle didn't want to see us. And I didn't feel bad because I looked at how my dad turned out. I think that this uncle really, really, really hurt my dad very badly, and it changed him for the rest of his life. And, knowing your roots, when you're able to see the source of the abuse, you then understand the role that narcissistic abuse plays in your modern life that's so far removed from, you know, your parents' generation and your grandparents' generation. Um, Taking the trip back home gave me very strong insights as to how these two families on either side were set up. Um, I did get to meet my great uncle, so my grandfather's brother, which was kind of cool because my grandfather passed away long ago. And when I met him, I gave him a really good look, and I was like, wow, like this is this is what my grandfather would have looked like if he was still alive. So I made sure I really gave him a good look, and I held his hand and I gave him a hug because that's the closest I think I would have ever gotten to meeting my grandpa. Um, as I got to meet some of my mother's cousins and family members, I think one thing that I took away from that is the role that everyone played in trying to keep all the details of that early part of my life quiet. And I think if we go back to the mysteries of life and spirituality, every family member that I met who helped keep, keep all the stories about me and my life quiet, private, silent, as I met them one by one, the ones who were alive, I realized that as I met them face to face, 30 years later, after everything had happened, um, they started to pass away. So I think by the time it was July when I was there, so July 2009, I believe it was, July 2008, 2009. By the time I got back to Toronto, 4 to 5 people who I had met in person passed away. And I believe that that was like a closure of a cycle of secrecy and privacy and hush hush information. When I brought it up to my family, my parents, and told them, I think that's odd. Like so many of the people that I met who knew me as a 1 year old all passed away. And they kind of brushed it off like, oh yeah, it's just a coincidence. And I was like, I don't know. I think it's a very spiritual issue. And I believe that everyone who played a part in keeping my story silent and protecting my dad to cover up a lot of the things that happened over the years, it was their time to go. And so I think I'm going to conclude this here because I talk about it more in the book.